Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Danielle Nierenberg, President of Food Tank.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Dani Nierenberg. I am president and co-founder of Food Tank. We are a research and advocacy organization really dedicated to telling stories of hope and success in the food system, both internationally and domestically. And I'm so pleased to be here in Arizona. Kathleen Merrigan, the director of the Swette Center, has been a really incredible mentor and longtime collaborator with Food Tank. And we're incredibly honored to be partnering with her and Dr. Albie Miles from the Sustainable Community Food Systems Program at the University of Hawai'i at West Oahu. I'd like you to give them both a round of applause. They put tremendous work into organizing today's event. This summit, as you all know, will really explore and highlight the wisdom of Indigenous foodways. And again, it's a real honor to be here. I'm incredibly humbled to be in a room with so many experts, Indigenous peoples from across the Southwest, from Hawaii and elsewhere, agriculture experts and advocates who all will share their thoughts on Indigenous foodways and why they have changed so dramatically, and how Indigenous communities are building healthy, socially just, and environmentally sustainable food systems for today and well into the future. We will have a series of short, really dynamic panels that will be moderated by top food and agriculture journalists and experts. These are meant to be real and blunt discussions. We don't want a lot of sound bites or platitudes. We want real, honest communication about what's happening. The panels themselves will all be moderated by journalists from the Arizona Republic, the Las Cruces Suns, Civil Eats, and other media outlets. The discussion is also being live streamed and will be available on the foodtank.com website after the event. I would really like you all to go to your social media platforms right now and tell your friends and your family to tune in live right now on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook, and any other outlets you use. You can use the hashtag #FoodTank to join the discussion. Additionally, we recognize that many of the discussions you'll hear today seem very brief, and we wanted to include as many voices as possible in a very limited time. But we are hoping to have really more in-depth discussions available on the Food Tank podcast called Food Talk with Dani Nierenberg. Again, we hope you'll go to Google Play and the Apple iTunes app and download the podcast there. For ASU students who would like to discuss today's summit more in depth, Kathleen Merrigan will be available on January 31st for a follow-up conversation from 1 to 3 p.m. in room 481 in the Wrigley Hall at the Tempe campus. So again, that's January 31st from 1 to 3 p.m. at the Tempe campus. I'd like to be able to say that discussions like the one we're having today happen all the time, that eaters, policymakers, business leaders, academics, farmers, scientists, and other stakeholders understand the importance of Indigenous foodways and respect the people and practices that have enriched communities since agriculture began. Sadly, that has not been the case. Indigenous peoples and their rights have often been ignored or dismissed, and that's especially true among the environmental and food advocacy community of which I am a part. But that is also something that we hope to change. The Swette Center, the University of Hawai'i, and Food Tank are committed to having more discussions like the one we're having today. These conversations can often be very uncomfortable, but I encourage us all to embrace that uncomfortableness and really challenge ourselves and ask the hard questions. We will have very, very limited time for Q&A from the audience. But I want you to know that all of the speakers will be available at the reception if you don't get a chance to ask them questions. If you do get a chance to ask a question, I ask that you end it with a question mark and not give your own speech. We really want to involve as many people in the audience as possible. And again, I just want to thank you all for your commitment for being here today. We put this together very quickly, this event, and it's so great to see a room full of people who are really interested in these issues and have a lot to share. It is now my real pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Thosh Collins, who will be giving the opening prayer. Thosh was raised in Salt River, Arizona. He works as a photographer and serves on the board for the Native Wellness Institute. He says he draws strength and motivation from the spiritual and cultural practices of his ancestors and recognizes the inherent physical durability embodied by them. Thosh uses that understanding to encourage all of us to reclaim and embrace our health. Please join me in welcoming Thosh to the stage. Thank you so much.
Sapo, skug hujinjik. Any autumn out there? All right, Sapo, good. Anya Pchugik, Thosh Collins, Anya Ia Amjad, on Akamir autumn, Jawad Amjad. Sapum Tad Kamye, Sapum Tad Cookie one Ia, Sapai Chukaj Anta Jiva. I come here with good intentions. My name is Thosh from the Salt River people, just right down the street right here. And I'm happy to see you all. It makes me feel good to be seeing everyone here at this beautiful gathering, and feel good to be standing up here. And I always appreciate when organizations and institutions that are on top of Autumn Jovad, the land of our people, that they acknowledge our people and go about the protocol in those ways. So we really appreciate that. And as I said, from the Salt River people just down the street right here on my paternal side and my maternal side, Wajaji and Haudenosaunee, my mom is from Oklahoma, and so I come from different indigenous nations, and I just again would like to thank the organizers for having me come up here and do the opening words of this. And so, as it was said, I work on the Native Wellness Institute as a board member there, and also co-founder for an Indigenous Wellness Initiative that I run. I co-founded with my wife Chelsea. That's called A Well for Culture, and most of our work is going around Native country and helping our people to raise consciousness about the importance of our health through connecting with our foods, our original movement systems, our indigenous worldviews, our languages, connecting with our land. And right here, this area that we are all sitting right here was inhabited by many of our ancestors up until recent times. Many people don't know that when Salt River was just first established, we were executive order tribe, that the entire reservation encompassed actually this mountain over here that's called Camelback Mountain, all the way pretty far out to East Mesa. Then it was reduced down. But before that, the O'odham lived a little bit further north from here, mainly along the river, the Salt River right here, and a little bit towards where we are today, just down right here. For those of you that are from here, the intersection of the 101 and the 202, our people lived all the way here and all the way down to the Kuri Akamir, the Gila River, and all the way down into the Tono O'odham Jovad, the desert people's land, Akchin, the Hiachad O'odham, the Sand people near Ajo, Arizona. And we also have relatives that are on the other side of the border. So we have Tono O'odham that live in Sonora, and we try to maintain our connection with those people too. So this whole area was inhabited by different O'odham Hamachkam, and before that, the Hukiokam, the ones they call Huhukam or Hohokam, means those that have moved on, those that are gone. They lived in this area, and they're the original people that had created the canal systems that now the Central Arizona Canal Project, as many of you are aware of, has modeled the main structure based off of the canal system that the Hukiokam built a long time ago. And our people were river people, and we had irrigated from the river, and most of the ditches still can be kind of seen. If you're familiar with near McKellup's Alma School and like 101, there's still old ditches that are kind of, you can barely see them, that they built to divert the water from the salt to get to the oiduct, to get to their fields. So we were corns, beans, squash people, and during certain times of the year, they would go out and they would harvest the hanam, and they would go out and harvest different types of mesquite beans, the oitkam, the ironwood beans, and then of course later on in the summer they would harvest the baidach, or the cactus fruit, and that was our new year. And then in the fall time to winter is when they would go out and hunt the mule deer and other small game throughout the year. So we always say that it's important that we connect with our foods, because with our foods, all of our desert foods are drought adapted. And many of you know that, and we know that in Arizona we're facing a mega drought. So it's important that we connect with these foods here because it's cultural, it's environmental, it's for our health, connects us to the land there, and these are deep-rooted in this land right here. So I just wanted to share a little bit about this land, a little bit about our area, and I know that there's much more to be said, and they said my time's up here, but I wanted to wish you all a good event, and that not to come here is everything that we're talking about, and our ancestors come here and they guide us and they open up our minds and they open up our ibadak, our heart, and allow us to take in this knowledge and then go back to our different directions where we came from to carry this knowledge to all of our friends and family that can use that. So I say all that with the good intentions. Tahuga, thank you.
From the ASU Royalty Court, Mr. Indian ASU First Attendant, Gabe Sanchez.
Skuktash. Anan Abjuki Gabriel Garcia Kumo'o Amjed Bisar Mo'o Chakshanchit Abaki Skiki Ktam. Anan Yamashtra Marshon Chakshan Kukur Hamashtra Makut. Anan Yamashtra Matamayang Supply Chain Management Global Technology and Development. Chaniwa First Attendant to Mr. Indian Arizona State University 2019-2020. Johnny Wood Jotam Womakad. So, hello everybody. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Gabriel Garcia. And I was asked to be up here to, bring recognition to our communities that we surround. And I myself, as an Alta member, am more than honored to do such thing. So in honor of that, I would love to sing a small version of the song. It's my favorite song that I've learned so far in my life, and it's more for a morning song, but it can also apply to anything that we believe needs a blessing. And for your safety, for your ride home, for your journey here, for everything that we're about to learn. I would love to sing this in your honor. So what it is it's for safety in all four directions from our big brother. And so in a few seconds right now, I'm about to start singing. So if I also rank up a little voice a little bit, sorry about that. Work with me. So all right, I'm gonna start. Ring a tanyo I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Ring a tanyo I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Si ko tap tam ha ta I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Ring a tanyo I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Ring a tanyo I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Si ko tap tam ha ta I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Ring a tanyo I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Si ko tap tam ha ta I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Ring a tanyo I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Si ko tap tam ha ta I toy cookie wasam yo inae. Sapa, thank you, and I hope you guys have a good enjoyment of this entertainment. Sapa.
Please welcome Brian Brayboy, President's Professor of Indigenous Education and Justice at the School of Social Transformation at ASU, and Mainette Benham, Chancellor of the University of Hawai'i at West Oahu.
While we're getting this settled, I just want to thank Gabriel again for starting us off, and Tosh for starting us off in a good way.
Aloha mai kako, aloha. On behalf of the University of Hawai'i West Oahu, it is with profound reflection and respect that I offer up this ho'oia aina, the land acknowledgement and message of aloha, acknowledging the indigenous peoples of this land. The University of Hawaii West Oahu aligns with the University of Hawaii's commitment to foster the well-being of all students with an indigenous lens through academic and social processes throughout a 10-campus, system-wide transformation we call Hawaii Papa'o Keao. So with much aloha, I, Mainet Kapeahiokalani Patikin Ani Benham, Chancellor of the University of Hawaii West Oahu, offer up this land acknowledgement to respectfully mahalo, to thank our hosts. Mahalo also to the kupuna, upon whose shoulders we all stand, whose teachings inspire us, help us to be imaginative, and awaken our senses. Anoai ke aloha. I am very honored to be with you this afternoon and this evening. I have prepared comments because I need to keep it within 6 minutes to allow my colleague here his portion of our 15-minute time. I'm honored to be here to learn with all of you, to focus on the ancestral wisdom, the ike, the knowledge found in our mo'olelo, our stories and our practices. This is truly the foundation upon which the resiliency and the survivance of humanity must be grounded. You know, whenever I speak about aloha aina, love for our land, malama honua, care for our global planet, I always share the story of my grandpa, who was a Lavaia. He was a fisherman. He was a throw net fisherman. And I am remembering those days in Ka'ava as a little girl where I would lay in the grass and look at the very blue sky through a clothesline that was draped with throw nets. And through that intricate mesh of woven netting, there in the corner sat my grandpa, very carefully mending and making his net. You know, I know that I love that day. I love that day because it's a day I get to spend with Grandpa, but more than that, it's a day that I get to hear his stories. So as my grandpa is sitting there, making sure every maka is the right size, making sure that every hitch knot is just so, that the piko, the center of that net, is strong, that all of the weights that surround the edges are clean and evenly balanced, my grandpa shares with me his stories. He tells me about how he learned about the importance of caring for the abundance of our ocean and all that feeds us and nourishes us, and how we, his grandchildren, must malama, must care for this abundance as it will nourish our family, both spiritually as well as physically. E ai ike kahi, e kapi ike kahi. Take what you need and save the rest for later. He cautions that a loss of this abundance will mean the loss of our ohana, the loss of our family. And as he speaks, he is making and mending his net, making each knot with a gentle hitch, lomi, and pull. Hitch, lomi, pull, hitch, lomi, pull, over and over and over again. I acknowledge the intelligence of our kupuna. Our Kanaka kupuna were smart, innovative, and wise, and they valued multiple intelligences as well as the common sense of the maka'ainana. My grandpa reminded his grandchildren through his stories that our Kanaka Aina connection, our people and place cordage, defines who we are as Kanaka Oiwi, people of Hawaii. His stories teaches us all that we can, if we choose, to rise to the call of our kuleana, our deep responsibility, and embrace the kaumaha, the challenges of that calling, through the dexterity of our hands, through the na'au that connects us to the wisdom of our ancestors, through our pu'uvai, our heart and our head, that helps us to put it all together through the care and skillfulness of the work that each and every one of you do. And that you will all engage with tonight and tomorrow. Mahalo ya o ko wa pau, malama pono, malama aina. Love our aina and care for all that feeds us. Mahalo for this opportunity to learn from you, to learn from your stories. Aloha.
It's always my good fortune to have to follow you, and that because you are so beautiful in all you do. So thank you. Chancellor Benham has been a longtime mentor of mine. I was a baby graduate student when I met her, and then became a baby assistant professor, and in some ways I'm still a baby professor. But she really helped guide me through, so I want to just publicly acknowledge you for all of that. So what is this thing about food? For me, what's really important about our evening together is that food does a couple of really important things, and I say this as a child and a grandchild and a great-grandchild of native farmers. One is that it nourishes us, not just in terms of our bodies, but in terms of our spirit. It connects us to a particular place and a particular moment, and it connects us as peoples working together with land to be able to nourish us, to nourish the land. If we do it well, then the land grows and develops and stays healthy in the process of doing that, even as it feeds us, even as we care for it, even as we steward it. So for me, this notion of stewardship becomes really important. I was raised in a family that suggested that stewardship is really the way that we should be thinking about food and farming, because we don't just leave land as we found it, we make it better for generations to come. And that is our fundamental responsibility, is to make sure that we do that. The federal government, the state government, counties and municipalities for a long time have thought about food and food issues in Native communities in some pretty destructive ways. It's been about obesity, it's been about diabetes that gets attached to that, it's about drug use. This evening is fundamentally not about that. This is really about what do we do with food and the places in which we live to create futures of our own making. What might the future look like for Indigenous people? So I want to really applaud the staff that's put this together. They've been so thoughtful in doing this. There's notions of resistance. How do we resist that narrative? How do we rewrite and reframe that narrative? There are notions of resilience. I mean, we fundamentally, Native peoples, because we are still here, have always resisted. The idea was to have us gone, so the fact that we're here is about resistance. We get to hear some really great people talk about that. We certainly take on those challenges. I don't want to diminish them by saying we're not going to address them, or that that's not what this evening is about. They are real, so I don't deny them. But fundamentally, the focus is about seeing those challenges, naming them, and then what might the future hold for us. I want to thank everyone who's here in attendance. For those of you all who are live streaming in, I give my profound gratitude to the team that's put this together, the thoughtfulness that has gone into it, and really looking forward to tonight. So let's get it on.
Please welcome Mariah Gladstone, founder of Indigikitchen.
Cool. It is so cool to be here today celebrating Indigenous foodways. For those that are familiar with my work, I run an online cooking show dedicated to teaching information about indigenous diets. And for the purpose of this speech, I was told not to go gloom and doomy. And probably because 3 years ago, I gave a TEDx talk that was about indigenous foodways, but was very much grounded in the dispossession and the harm that we have suffered because of that. I talked a lot about genocide. But I think that for this, it's really important to celebrate the progress that's being made. Even compared to 3 years ago, foodways in Indian country are looking vastly different, and we aren't the statistics that are put in front of us. I do work about revitalizing traditional indigenous foods, but we don't have a lot of case studies about what happens when we go back to traditional foods. I have a friend from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and in 2010, her dad decided that their family was going to eat only indigenous foods from the UP for a year. And because he's also a professor at Northern Michigan, he got IRB approval and turned it into a research project. She said she got really sick of turkey, but she also told me great stories about going out in a field all day with her cousins and catching grasshoppers because they needed spices for dinner. Guess that's better than colonizing half the world, right? But some of the recipes didn't always turn out. For example, the pizza experiment, which was a cornbread crust, pumpkin sauce, leeks, mushrooms, and turkey. It did not make the recipe book. At the end of this year, they did a statistical analysis on the research participants, and all of them showed a reduction in weight, girth, and improved scores on cholesterol, blood sugar, and BMIs. Overall, this was, of course, a nutritional gain. But indigenous foods are about so much more than nutritional values alone. There's a village in Alaska, Cake, a very small village, predominantly Native people. And in the 1980s, it was leading the nation in a suicide rate. In 1988, they formed a culture camp that for 2 weeks took kids and taught them things about indigenous foods. They learned how to make Devil's Club tea, they learned how to dress a seal, they learned fishing, they learned all of these traditional skills about their indigenous foods, which not only taught them how to live off the land, but also connected them to their environment, connected them to that inherent wisdom of their ancestors and their identities. 3 years later, there were no suicides in Cake, and it remained that way for over 2 decades. All over Indian country, work is being done to revitalize our food systems. We look to tribal communities that are creating their own food networks and systems. Quapaw Nation in Oklahoma built a bison-sized processing facility. Red Lake up in Minnesota harvests walleye, wild rice, berries that they turn into syrup. But there's also, of course, private enterprises that are also native producers that are creating foods that not only help their community, but help the people that they are selling to. Sakari Botanicals and their cedar smoked salt. Tonka bars. There are so many incredible stories about regeneration in Indian country. But I also think it's important to look to the seed savers and those that are working on restoring those traditional seeds back to the communities that originally grew them. The Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, of course, works with other seed savers and finds indigenous varieties of seeds and replenishes those numbers of seeds and then returns them to the communities where they came from. I always joke, because I'm a fan of zombie movies, that in a zombie apocalypse, it is going to be your botanists and your gardeners that are going to help you out a lot longer than your buddy with a gun. Speaking of getting dirty, sometimes the best tool we have in Indian country is a good lawyer. The Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative at the University of Arkansas School of Law are some of the best policy nerds that Indian country has on our side, and people that we really need. Through their leadership, they created the Native Farm Bill Coalition that banded together over 170 different tribal organizations and tribes, and spent a lot of time lobbying Congress on the latest version of the Farm Bill. The bill that passed has 63 separate measures for Indian country, including 6 just for traditional foods and native produced products. I spent time lobbying for that, and it's really cool to see the results of that work. Sometimes when you're spending time in those offices, it's challenging to see where that's going to end up when you're dealing with a piece of legislation that's hundreds of pages thick. But it's really cool to see the results that policy nerds and the partnership that they create impacts the legislation that we have in Washington. Not only that, they're creating model food and agricultural codes for tribes to adopt so that they can be responsible for legislating their own food and agriculture that's taking place in our nations. There's communities that are crafting policies specifically for wild harvested foods, merging food code with our environmental conservation codes. For some reason, we do not see that a lot in the US, but that's integral to who we are as Native people. I started doing this work because I saw the work of seed keepers and the work of Native producers and the work of policy makers and the community excitement around traditional foods. And yet, for many people, despite having that excitement, there is still a challenge to return to those foodways. And that comes from an intentional separation from our traditional practices. But I started doing what I do, creating a YouTube channel to teach Indigenous food, because I wanted a place where you could Google traditional recipes and feel empowered to start making your ancestral foods. And of course, my work was not without hiccups either. I jerry-rigged my camera with a tripod that didn't actually support its weight and started filming something about making maple sugar. Maple sugar is actually pretty easy to make when you have maple syrup. You just have to heat it to a certain temperature, keep stirring, and cool chemical reaction. It turns into crystallized sugar. It's more challenging when you have to take that off of the heat and then adjust your camera and keep stirring it. And so I have a whole bunch of footage of maple sugar boiling all over the counter while I was trying to adjust the camera because I'm a one-man film crew. That said, editing software is great, and you guys can all look that up, and you don't see that on the final video. I'm also really thankful for the hundreds of Native chefs that exist in Indian country who swap recipes and stories. There's a couple folks that I'm especially thankful to that answer my Twitter DMs when I ask, how do I leach acorns? Or, I have a bison heart. what do I do with it? I've learned so much, and I've tried to impart the knowledge that I've gained with other folks in the digital community. And it's really cool to see the work that I'm doing, even as simple as putting a video up on Facebook, being shared around. I see people tagging their grandmothers in the Facebook comments and saying, we should make this next week. Don't we have that deer that Cousin Joe got? And it's so cool because I know that there is this return to traditional foodways and people are utilizing this knowledge and this connection. I was at the Intertribal Agricultural Council's annual meeting in Las Vegas last month. And their executive director, Zach Ducheneau, emphasized the importance of walking the talk and making sure that we are infusing our cultural values into the work that we are doing in Indian food and agriculture. There was a banquet served at this event that came entirely from native produced foods. There was bison, and there was walleye, and there was grits, and there was wild rice salad. And it was amazing to see how the foods that Indian country is growing can feed ourselves. But what's more, at the end of that, the leftover food was boxed up into to-go boxes, and a group of us volunteers took that to the homeless shelter in Vegas. Food is not a commodity for Indian country. It's not something to be bought and sold and hoarded. It is a gift from the earth, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we are sharing that gift and we're feeding those who need it most. We're feeding ourselves, and the foods that Indian country has cultivated over the years feed a lot of the world. When I look at the state of native foodways, I don't see gloomy statistics predicting diabetes and obesity. I see shoots of green coming up, like a burnt forest that's regenerating itself. I see healing, and I see restoration for our food systems. And I'm so excited to hear from the panelists and the speakers today. Thank you guys for having me. Walking this way.
Please welcome Paula Daniels, Janie Hipp, Melissa Nelson, and Chef Sean Sherman, moderated by Deb Kroll, environment reporter at the Arizona Republic.
I'm Deb Kroll, world member of the Hopkins Tribe, Central California Coast. These days, I'm more of a suburban Indian, so I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. We only have 45 minutes, and each of us could talk for 45 minutes just on our subject. So to my left is Paula Daniels, who is Native Hawaiian, the co-founder of Center for Good Food Purchasing. To her left, needs almost no introduction, Jamie Sims Hipp. She's the, yep, there you go. President and CEO of Native American Agricultural Fund, and she is Chickasaw. To her left is Melissa Nelson, who is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. She's professor of American Indian Studies at San Francisco State University and also president of the Cultural Conservancy. And last but not least, another person who needs no introduction, the sous chef, also known as Sean Sherman, Oglala Lakota. So thanks all for joining us. You saw the name of the panel is Disempowering Laws and Institutions. What do we think needs to be changed? One of the things that we decided that we wanted to talk about was a very, very brief description of what they're doing to help Indigenous peoples within their own communities to achieve, gain, regain, and sustain food sovereignty and food security, with an emphasis on what their organization does. So,
Me first?
go for it.
Aloha kako. So my name, Paula Daniels. I'm co-founder of the Center for Good Food Purchasing. And what we do is we're trying to use public purchasing dollars for public good. So we're trying to recreate, reframe, rework how public food spending is managed. So as an example, we work largely with school districts around the country. So our program is one that works something like, if you've heard of LEED certification, that is a rating program for how energy efficient buildings are. We have a set of standards like that for evaluating the food purchasing of large institutions in the categories of support for local economies, including smallholder farmers, environmental sustainability, animal welfare, fair labor, and nutrition. And we get their food purchasing information and we reflect back to them how well they're doing. It can add up to points. It gives them a star rating. So we now have 18 cities, 40 institutions around the country enrolled in our program: Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Boston, DC, San Francisco, Oakland, Austin, on and on. I won't list all of them, but they're all enrolled in the program and participating. And the intention of it is that they start making changes in how they're purchasing. An example is that when Los Angeles enrolled in our program with a $150 million food budget, they started sourcing locally. They had been less than 10% sourcing of local food. It went to 60% sourcing of local produce in a year. That redirected $12 million back into the local food economy and created 150 new jobs. So that's our idea, is let's start bending public purchasing dollars toward public good.
Thank you. Janie.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's really great to be here, and I have to thank Kathleen and Suzanne for keeping me in their thoughts always. We used to work together several years ago. My current iteration, and I've had many, is I'm the CEO of the Native American Agriculture Fund. Some of you may not know what that is. It was born out of a 20-year litigation against USDA for discrimination in the loan programs within the Farm Service Agency. That was a hard-fought, long litigation battle, a national class action. Claims were paid to claimants who were individual Native farmers and ranchers who were harmed. And one of the outgrowths of and I can go on forever about the history of the litigation and the complexities of the settlement, but part of the outcome of that particular case, which is the Keep Siegel case, was the creation of the Native American Agriculture Fund. It was born in late July of 2018. The remaining funds from the settlement of the case were transferred to the fund and into the control of a board of 14 all-Native trustees and myself, and we have been standing up the fund. It is a $250 million fund. It has never been done. We have never had this level of resource to focus specifically on the needs and the support for Native farmers and ranchers, ever in the history of all of us. So it is a monumental task, it's a monumental responsibility, but it's also the most exciting thing that you can imagine, right? Everyone's excited. We actually have some grantees who are in the room. But in a very short amount of time, the fund's staffed up. Several of my staff are sitting back there, and they can do a shout out, but we got the first request for applications on the street within 6 months. We vetted those applications, a couple of hundred, and we have made the first allocation of funding. We are getting ready to do the second allocation of funding for 2020 and on and on. It is a 20-year spin-down trust. We have 20 years. Actually, we have 19 and counting. So I'm going to get that clock and I'm going to put it in the office. But we are so excited and we're so thrilled to see the applications that we see. Our focus is on programs that would support Native farmers and ranchers, business assistance, education, advocacy, technical support. We're allowed to fund through 4 types of entities: tribal governments, community development financial institutions to address the issue of loan access, 501c3s, and educational institutions. So I'll leave it at that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bujunin Dinoi Maganatug. Greetings to all my relatives, and thank you for that beautiful opening by the local men. That was really lovely. My work with Indigenous food sovereignty is really multifaceted. Pretty much anything I get my fingers in, I bring the conversation about food sovereignty into it. So through higher education, research, publications, advocacy, but where I really get my hands in the dirt is through the Cultural Conservancy. We are an Indigenous-led Native rights organization based in San Francisco. We're going on our 35th year, and we've had an Indigenous foodway program for over 20 years, focusing on urban Indian food justice with the intertribal communities of the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as advocacy for local California Indian nations, whether they're federally recognized or not. So we manage 2 farms, one organic farm, the Indian Valley Organic Farm and Garden at the College of Marin, that is relatively accessible for urban Indian communities. So we do a lot of outreach and education. We have clean, healthy land for people to bring their heritage seeds and grow their foods. We focus on corns, beans, and squash. We have a lot of Haudenosaunee folks in the area, Mohawk, Oneida, Seneca. We also have a lot of Southwestern folks. So we have grown tepary beans, other beans, Zuni Gold. So we're creating our own seed library to really honor the heritage of our sacred seeds and foods, and work with NAFSA, the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, and their Seed Keepers Network to really advocate for the protection of our seeds. We also have just acquired an 8-acre property in consultation with the local sovereign nation, the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, and are creating a biocultural heritage oasis that will include a lot of indigenous agriculture. So that's been really a huge project we're working on that's very exciting. We also amplify indigenous food stories through our Native Seed Pod podcast. We're in our 2nd season right now. Check it out at the Native Seed Pod. And lastly, in the work I've done with Sean Sherman and many folks, is we've been advocating for a space for indigenous food systems discussions with the slow food movement internationally. So we've co-founded the Slow Food Turtle Island Association, part of the Indigenous Terra Madre Global Network of Indigenous Peoples. So that's another arena that I think is very important, where we're advocating for more assertions of indigenous foods and health. And I'll stop for now. So thank you.
Happy Wash Day. My name is Sean Sherman. I'm from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. My company is the Sous Chef. The work that we are doing is really focused on the nonprofit we created a couple years ago called NATIFs.org, which is an acronym for North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems. So under NATIFs, a 501c3, we're opening up a nonprofit restaurant brand called the Indigenous Food Lab, starting in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we're based at. Indigenous Food Lab will be a nonprofit restaurant where the public will be able to come and try a whole bunch of creative offerings from a bunch of creative Native chefs and Indigenous chefs. But what's really exciting about it is it's a place where we're offering Indigenous... I'm going to have to... There we go. All right. So it's a place where we really want to offer Indigenous education. So we really want to make Indigenous education accessible to anybody that wants to have it, basically. So we're developing a lot of curriculum on bite-sized classes of everything in the food system. So seed saving, farming styles, wild foods and ethnobotany, cooking techniques, food preservation, language, crafting, and just having a lot of fun being able to develop a lot of that. The goal of Indigenous Food Lab is to create this educational and training center where people could actually work alongside us in the restaurant to develop skills with this food. But our real goal is to work with the tribal communities in our vicinity and region and help them to develop their own healthy Indigenous food system for their community. So it could be something as small as a catering operation in a community center, or it could be as large as a full-scale restaurant if the tribe has the means and resources. And we basically will help develop and create unique food entities for all these tribal communities that reflect who they are, their tribe, their community, their history, their language, and the flavors around them, and really strengthen them to hopefully grow out more community gardens if there's the seeds from those regions, to really connect them with that, to think about permaculture design and just putting food everywhere. So we always say lawns are stupid. We should be, putting food everywhere we absolutely can. And our further goal is to open up Indigenous food labs in cities all over the nation. So we could be in Phoenix, Albuquerque, the Bay Area, Chicago, Denver, Boston, anywhere and everywhere. So each food lab would do the same work to satellite around itself and help strengthen Indigenous communities. And we don't really stop with the colonial borders of the US and Canada and Mexico, so we could easily be throughout Canada, up in Alaska, down in Mexico, and even down the road on a global scale to help work with our Indigenous communities and families all over the globe. So we're pretty excited because we're on a time frame to open the first food lab in September this year. So I think we're going to be having a lot of fun, helping to create a lot of Native chefs and get a lot of Native food out there.
Yeah, I'm going to teach him how to do some really cool things with acorns. So thanks all. One of the things that I thought that we could kind of have a conversation about is we need to kind of face reality that we're never going to be 100% back to where we were in pre-contact days. But we can get there. Can we get there 80%, 90%, 95%? And how can we use tech being traditional ecological knowledge, and the technical innovations that a lot of us have become accustomed to either reclaim, sustain, or build our native food sovereignty, our native food security, and to return to our much healthier and more environmentally sustainable food sources.
So I think we now live in an all of the above society in a lot of ways when you think about tech. I mean, obviously we're sitting here talking into microphones, we're being live streamed. There's a lot that we layer into bringing ourselves, which, we ourselves are representative of eons of evolution of a species into this conversation. But with what we're doing with food systems, what we hope to do is get to a point where each region can have a pretty significant share of its food system be regionalized and localized. And it can support a lot of indigenous foodways. So if, for example, in Hawaii, the school districts were to adopt our good food purchasing program and they were to buy from an ulu cooperative, a breadfruit cooperative, they would get points for local economies, they'd get points for environmental sustainability, they'd get points for fair labor, they'd get points for nutrition, all of those points, and it would reward them for doing that work, and they could keep setting goals for getting more and more of that into their food system. So I think that we can take an example from renewable energy, and a lot of regions having renewable energy standards that they worked towards. So LA, for example, had a 20% renewable energy goal by 2020, and then they went way past that. Hawaii has a 30% local food goal. And I think to get there, that would mean incorporating a lot of different diverse farm holders. But if we were to try to set regional goals that way and then use modern technology for communications, for logistics, for matchmaking, I think we can really start at least recreating the village sense of what our food system once was in this global context.
Cool. All right, folks, who's next? Go for it. Yeah, just go
Great.
for it.
I'm very lucky as a teacher, of course, to work with a lot of young Native folks who are always now talking about Indigenous futurisms, right? And what does it mean to be an Indigenous person in the 21st century and the next century, if we're so lucky to survive? And so I love that there's this whole new movement of young folks really incorporating the best of their elders' teachings with traditional ecological knowledge and multimedia and film and GIS technology for mapping, for better management of ancestral lands. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for this, and one I would really focus on is media. Like you said, we've got these microphones, we've got this camera, you know, thousands of people can see things non-locally now, and we're getting these stories out in the world that weren't here before, because as Kathleen, the origination of this meeting was, we need to listen to Indigenous peoples because our voices are often silenced, marginalized, denigrated. One thing I think really needs to change is Indigenous food systems knowledge is science. It's not folklore, they're not stories, it's not quaint in anthropology, they're sciences and need to be respected as such. And that's part of why these podcasts that we're doing, we're amplifying these stories by California Indian traditional knowledge holders, tending the wild, people who know about fire management, water management, how that's all related to our food systems. The media work that Sean has done with other chefs. Now you can get cooking lessons and learn about the history of these different Native recipes and nutritions and cuisines. So I think media is one of the best tools that Native people have in the food movement to really amplify and share our stories of resilience. Thank you.
I'm afraid I'll take everybody off track. Go for it.
We love how you do that, Jean.
If you get too far
There's
off track,
there's a
we'll
danger
drag
in
you
giving
back.
me a microphone.
There's no off track with you.
Oh, there's so much I want to say. First of all, we can't be afraid of this. I mean, really? Our ancestors were not afraid of change. We're not afraid of innovation. We're not afraid to do whatever they needed to do to feed each other and feed their families. And to me, I see the world through the eyes of farmers, ranchers, fishers, and food people. That's my only passion. And I believe that our opportunities with the fund right now are really to seed as much as we can and to support whatever is happening out there. If you actually applied for funding this last go around, you saw traditional foods mentioned. You saw youth mentioned. You saw agricultural science mentioned. You saw all sorts. I mean, we just kind of left the door open. And I think that tech meets tech. We were the first agricultural scientists. Let's own that, right? And this idea that certain things are off limits, we need to really equip ourselves to be able to survive. And I will tell you that I don't believe we lift up and support our young people enough. And the young staff I have know that I just push them out in front. Go for it, right? Cindy and Carly are back there. Mariah, I've touched on her. I've pushed her in front. I will do whatever I can to support the voices of our young people. They need to support the voices of their elders. That's not my job. My job is to help whatever we can do with the fund, through the fund, to prepare us all in this declining moment of having these resources to bear. And I'm an ag lawyer by training, and we cannot ignore the law. The law is important. If we don't have legal mechanisms to point to and support our treaties, then what are we doing? Our treaties are important, and I realize not all tribes have treaties. I totally understand that, but there are so many other mechanisms that we can do both together within our communities, within our families, but working intertribally, and we need allies. But we need allies to show up.
So the future that we see, I think we share this vision with a lot of people, but we see a future where, you know, we will be able to drive across this continent in any direction and visit indigenous food businesses, experience indigenous food production, and see the immense amount of diversity out there and celebrate that diversity, you know, instead of trying to draw division lines around things and assimilate everything. I think it's really important to think about how empowered we can be to absorb a lot of our ancestors' knowledge and still utilize the world that we live in today with all the tools and technology and all of the exposure. We really feel like we're walking into an era of reclamation as Indigenous peoples, you know, because a lot of the work that I have done was been looking at history. You know, I think about I was born in 1974, and 100 years prior to my birth, in 1874, my Lakota ancestors still retained 100% of their indigenous knowledge at that time period. And the question to myself was like, what happened to that knowledge, you know, by the time I was born 100 years later, and what was lost? And starting to piece together a lot of that information of how are they harvesting things, how are they gathering things, what was the knowledge of all the plants, you know, all of the ceremonies and everything. And those were the pieces that I wanted to start to put together, and food was helping us do this. You know, food was such a beautiful way to weave that story back together. And I feel like to be able to reclaim and regain, at least taking the steps to regain a lot of that knowledge that was systematically taken from us, and do something with it, you know, and move forward with strength and move forward with our ancestors with us. And I think it's going to be a really beautiful next generation that comes out of this. And the work that we're trying to do of just creating these restaurant and educational systems that can help people continuously develop Indigenous education is really to strengthen those future generations. Because if they can be born into a world where they already have it, where they don't have to search so hard to find what their indigenous foods are and where their indigenous foods are, but just have access to them from day one, that they're going to grow up with that strength, and they're going to be able to take this further than we can in our own lifetime. So it's really about strengthening those future generations and setting down that foundation and that structure so they can grow in a healthy future for themselves and continue to pass on all of this wonderful knowledge, and to pass on the seeds, and to pass on all of these stories that are woven into us, and to make sure that they last for generations.
Beautiful. I think he's mesmerizing. I just wanted to build on that tech point for a second, too. As Janie was saying, our ancestors always embraced tech. Iolani Palace in Hawaii was the first palace, the first state capital. Well, it wasn't a state capital at the time. First building like that to be electrified. So it was, my point is, it had electricity before the White House did. Hawaiians were using electricity in their palace before the people in the White House figured out it was a good thing to do. So I'm just saying, you know, we understand that technology can be a good thing if you use it in the right way, but I also want to tell you the story about the Hiki and Alia. So just briefly, the Hawaiian voyaging, the Hokulea, was a voyage that was one of great courage in the 1970s that showed how, through the founders of that society, Polynesian Voyaging Society, showed how the ancient Hawaiian ways of navigating were legitimate. There wasn't a belief before that time that we actually intentionally got to Hawaii. Some of the thinking was we just kind of drifted there. Well, we knew in our bones, we knew in our genes, we knew in our genetic memories that we got there by design, and we had these skills. And so Nainoa Thompson proved that this could happen, and he taught, you know, reclaimed the knowledge of celestial navigation and sailed the Hokulea from a traditional voyaging canoe from Hawaii to Tahiti. Recently, the Hokulea sailed around the world. It took a long time, it took a few years, but they sailed around the world. I don't know how many of you heard about that, but they went to South Africa, they went to the United Nations, they went around the world. One of the canoes that is part of this Polynesian Voyaging Society now is the Hiki and Alia, which is built in a traditional way. It is navigated by the stars, by the reading the oceans, the winds, and it has solar panels on it. Do you see my point? It's using traditional knowledge to do something really incredible. The knowledge of the people navigating it is the most important thing. Technology is a tool, it's not a way of life. They're using traditional knowledge, technology can serve that.
So I think we can kind of, continue on this vein. As everyone has said, we Native peoples, we are the first geneticists. We are the first agricultural scientists. We have our ways of knowing and our ways of doing things that when Europeans first showed up, there was an abundance for all. There was great biodiversity. How many foodstuffs around the world got their start here in the Americas? I mean, there's way too many to count. And so I guess I want to kind of ask everybody that what types of policies, what types of laws would you say that are in place that can support in this effort to go back and to sustain our food systems? And what changes do you see that could be made to make it better?
Oh, that would be a long conversation. Right, Janie? Honestly, I do think we need to look at what we support, publicly, because our federal monies obviously go in a certain direction. So I would just say what I'm looking at is scales of governance. And I think that at a local level and a state level, there is more likelihood that you can get policies in place that can support re-regionalizing the food system, which would be incorporating traditional ways and methods. And we are looking at that. We're looking at what kind of incentive structures can be put into place to help support the public institutions that want to do more serve the public good, create the markets for local and indigenous communities, how to support them in doing that. So it might be reworking our funding streams.
I want to, is it okay? Yeah, go for it. We appear on panels so often. It's like, do you want to take that or do you want me? So I shared with y'all I'm an agricultural lawyer by training. I've done this work for 35 years. Paula just talked about state and local. I always talk about federal and tribal. I honestly, a couple of things I want to say. Tribal governments have the tools to actually pass their own policies and speak to their food systems. What are they going to do to actually wrap their arms around their food people, but also wrap their arms around their food systems? And, I will, and Tracy, where are you, Tracy? My Chickasaw sister. I was telling her a story that I went to our cultural center and I kept hearing from people, we didn't have agricultural laws, we didn't have food laws. So I went to the oldest book of laws for the Chickasaw people and I let it open. And on either side was an agricultural law. So I don't want to hear that anymore because we all had various forms of cultural norms and actual written laws and all sorts of things that we did that kind of sit around policy, whatever that is. So before I left to become the CEO of the fund, I led the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative, which is now led by Colby Duran. Thank God I stole him from NCAI before I left. But he can tell you, he could come up here and talk for days about the power of tribal self-governance around food and agriculture. It's been a missing piece of the puzzle, and we have to fill that in. But they've got tools at their fingertips that they can share with every tribal government, every Native nation. Here, go for it. We will help you interpret and do whatever you need to do to be in the food and ag law space. But I also wanted to share with you all that this last farm bill, everybody loves to say, keep your hands away from it, don't touch it. Why? Why would we do that? I realize a lot of us have things within the farm bill that we don't like, But the tools and mechanisms that are in that federal piece of legislation have to have our attention, because if we don't pay attention, they could harm us, right? And so the Native Farm Bill Coalition was created out of whole cloth, literally, what, in 6 months' time, Colby? And in 6 months had half of all federally recognized tribes who were signed on to be a part of the coalition, and in another 6 months had convinced Congress to implement and put into the law 63 different fixes to federal law that opened up tribal parity, tribal equality around self-governance, around food and ag issues, fixed some creepy little weird things that needed to be fixed. And we get calls still. What else? What else can we do for you? What else can we fix? This idea that we only operate in certain spaces with certain people, I can't do that, because I believe in the all of the above. We have to use every tool available to us, try it on, see if it works, and we have to figure out how we're going to strengthen our food systems, and we need all of these tools. And I will tell you, and then I'll shut up, Kathleen and Suzanne here at the Swette Center, I'm gonna say it, thank God they're here, and thank you for doing this. I used to run into their offices and cry. And I cried with them, because those two women right there did everything they could while they were at USDA to put their finger in the dike and to turn things around for tribal governments and Indian people, and I thank you. I've never done that publicly, but you deserve our thanks. So I'm here to be here all of the time. Shut up now.
I'd like to share an interesting story some of you may be aware of, is the Buffalo Treaty. It's such an incredible story of modern day nation-to-nation treaty building without state governments, provincial governments, the federal government, Indian nation to Indian nation, led by the Blackfeet Confederacy in Alberta to bring back their traditional foods and their relative, their sacred relative, the buffalo. And now there's been over 50 nations have signed on to this treaty that started between the different Blackfeet communities on both sides of the Canadian-US border. They didn't ask any of their governments for permission. As we know, sovereignty is as sovereignty does. They didn't ask for permission. They went across international boundaries where their tribal lands were, and they started opening up their lands for their buffalo to roam freely again across those borders and boundaries. And it was tribal government to tribal government, and finally, the provincial government, of course, and the parks, and then the Montana and Idaho, the state governments were like, whoa, what's going on here? You guys are rewriting, boundaries. We want to be a part of it. And so it's an incredible story where the tribes took their sovereignty, their food sovereignty, through the relationship with their buffalo, and they brought back these agreements to open up space, to honor the buffalo in a different way. And now conservation organizations, land trusts, state parks, national parks, regional governments, state governments are all joining, and it's become a massive movement. And a lot of the folks from the coast are saying, that's a good idea. Maybe we should do a salmon treaty across the Washington State, British Columbia boundary with the Salish Sea, trying to reclaim the waters there and heal and clean up those waters. So that's an example of tribal law that I think is so significant. And real briefly, I just want to mention also, we can't forget the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It doesn't have any political teeth right now, but again, we need to assert it. And even though, sadly, food is not mentioned in that wonderful declaration, everything we need for food is soil, seeds, water, farming knowledge. So it's all there contextually, and we need to assert that more in local battles over access to our our gathering sites. Thank you.
Yeah. we just really believe that the power lies in food, you know, and it's really important to think about our indigenous ancestors, how they survived for millennia, you know, primarily utilizing plant knowledge when it came down to it. And food is at the center of everything, and it has to be at the center of our future as we move forward. And we have to have control over food, you know, and that's part of the food sovereignty. Like we have to have our own control, and we have to build those controls. We can't allow other people to control our food, because if we can control our own food, we can control our future. And that's how we're going to protect ourselves and protect our environments. And the food is attached to our environment, so it's also a protection of our environments as we look at it. So it's always thinking ahead, and it's always thinking and being a part of nature, like feeling it, how it's coming, because as we're crawling into these eras of climate change, and there's so much stuff happening, as indigenous peoples, we have to be adaptful, and we have to listen to the earth. You know, we have to see what's moving and how it's changing and how we can survive with it. And that's completely possible. It's just going to be different. You know, it's going to be different than our ancestors' experience, but we can adapt and we can evolve and we can move forward. But again, we have to have that control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then just really briefly, I'll let take it over. There is a consortium on the West Coast called the West Coast Ocean Alliance, which is tribes in the U.S. and Canada along the Pacific Ocean, and we've all been meeting to develop policies related to ocean, you know, marine waters, estuaries, surf fish, you know, other native plants and foods, and to protect the lands and waters. And I don't know if any treaties are going to come out of that, but we're all talking about the issues that we share and working to develop some sort of policies where we can speak with a united voice, because the Pacific Coast tribes all have basically the same issues, the same food concerns, and the same issues dealing. Washington and California really have a hard time dealing with our states. So, but thank you.
This put me in mind of something important that we've been learning about. And I'll have to say here, I'm a recovering attorney. I hate to admit that I'm an attorney. I haven't practiced in a long time. I'm a recovering attorney. But sometimes I pay attention to how these legal structures work again. And there's a lot that cities are learning from tribal laws. So there's laws, I'm observing how this is happening, that are popping up around the United States and in some countries that declare the rights of nature to flourish, but also there are tribal laws about the rights of wild rice and other rights that reorient the thinking about our relationship to nature, that it's not something we control or own, but it's something in partnership and has standing along with us. So they're interesting enactments that are crossing into other jurisdictional areas like states and other national governments. So we can learn from what the tribal governments do and think about how it might apply in our other settings.
Can I also say, though, that while we talk about and ponder and walk around and kick the tires on all of these things, let us never forget the food people. Let us never forget the rights of the farmers and the ranchers and the food people and the fishers. Can we not do that? Because if you were to ask them, they would tell you they know more than you likely do about the rights of nature. But someone has to feed us. I bet 3/4 of you don't want to feed yourselves. And I get a little in everybody's face about this, and I'm not going to apologize. We have to have in the equation of this, and I don't think rights of nature is a bad thing, but we have to have the rights of the people to feed us embedded in that as well. And if we don't, it'll get off kilter, as so many things do. And we have to lift them up, and nobody talks about them. The closest I've ever seen to people talking about what's going on with our food people is the chefs. You know why? Because you have to have them in your equation, or you can't do your work. So I just have to say that and have to keep saying it. Every venue I'm at, we have to protect and hold them up. support them in what they need to do for us.
Yeah, we have time. We have 8 minutes for audience questions, so. Anyone?
So Gabe has a microphone. Who has a question for this panel? Are you kidding me?
Come on.
We stunned them into silence.
We did such a good job. No.
First hand up.
No. No.
No?
Can you try turning the microphone on, maybe?
You want to shout it out? We'll repeat it.
Come on up and use mine. Here.
I deal with the school systems, and I'm curious on the reservations. If in the public school systems, you know, they have they're buying their foods through different ways. So, in the school systems on a reservation, are they able to buy the foods from the local farmers that are on the reservations, and how does that work on a reservation?
I can tell you, we've actually done a study on that. and I'm looking at Carly back there and Colby over there. You just offered up probably the most complicated question that there possibly is. Thank you for going straight to the heart of the matter. The reality is that it depends on who runs the school, and it depends on the jurisdiction that the school sits within. And there's so much that can be done with regard to feeding people better, feeding children better in those schools. But you have to unpack the whole issue to try to figure out who is actually buying the food, who has control and authority on that. And the reason why I referred to Carly is Carly's on our staff. She actually did a study of taking the current feeding program mechanisms, and this does apply to schools, and taking it, decentralizing it from a national food purchasing piece into a regionalized, tribal-controlled piece. And she was able to prove in her economic modeling that the federal government would save $200,000 a month in transportation and logistics costs alone. So that sort of unpacking, you and I, we need to talk because that unpacking and then the doing the studies necessary to actually figure out the cost mechanisms, because somebody will always bring that up, I promise. So I'm just telling you that we just need to nudge this stuff along, and we're going to find solutions that we have just not looked at yet.
I've got a question here. Oh,
Okay.
Chef, did you have to get it on that one?
Just real quick, I've done a lot of work with school systems too, trying to they'll ask us can you come in and show us what we can do with this food system, with the foods that we have to offer and the price range that we have to offer, which is what, $1.35 or something like that per student, right? And it's really hard, and plus, on some of the reservation schools, they're using basically the commodity food program, and you have to go down the list, and I had to break it up into 4 categories of these ones are good, these ones are so-so, these ones you should avoid, and these ones you should just give away probably, because it's unfortunate that it's not a nutritional program for the most part, But if it was broken up into regional food systems, it would change everything, because the commodity food program, recently tried to bring wild rice in to disperse that across the nation, but it's going in the wrong way because people in the southeast or the southwest, what are you going to do with wild rice, You should be purchasing from indigenous peoples, indigenous grown food to disperse within that region. If you're going to do it that way, then that would help save a lot of time and effort and transportation, and it would create a lot more nutrition if they're supplying for the region it is. So you have to break it up into smaller chunks and think about that.
Sorry. And we've been fighting for that issue, right, Kobe, for about the last 6 years. And we need allies who can actually advocate with us and trust us to be able to fight for the power and the control to make those decisions ourselves.
Thank you all for coming. This has really been great for me. I'm Bill McDormand, Director of the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance. I'm a white privileged male, educated largely in the Western colonial, education system. Obviously not native to the Southwest, although I love it. But I have spent my whole life growing, saving, and sharing seeds and teaching people how to do that. So my question is, how can those of us that aren't native here help you and support you in this beautiful vision that actually encompasses our survival and our future also?
Support tribal sovereignty.
For how we modeled our business, first we try and purchase from indigenous food producers first, right? Because we really want to create a lot of economic opportunity into tribal communities, because there's a lot of opportunity. We're going to help create a lot of demand for indigenous foods. But our next tier is just using our regional food system, or just using our partners who are not native, but they're whoever they are, just our friends, right? And we're being able to purchase regional, local foods to be able to supplement everything else that we need, because there's so much great produce, and seeds is such an important part, and I sit on Seed Savers Exchange Board and around a lot of seed saving, a lot of people, and it's such an important part. And we want a lot of allies out there to be able to be a part of this, to preserve all those genetic strains that are out there, because we're the stewards. Like, it's up to us. It's our responsibility to ensure that those seeds get passed on to the next generations, and that those next generations know what to do with them, and continue to carry the stories that they're attached to. And especially with the indigenous seeds of these regions, where they have such deep histories and coming from very specific people, it's really important to share that. But we have to work together as a community, and it's going to be healthy for all of us to do that.
So we have one more question. We have this nice young lady.
I'm going to add just one more thing to that. There is a seed rematriation movement happening that Rowan White and the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network of NAFSA is leading, to release these seeds that have been imprisoned in seed banks for sometimes decades, centuries, and the local people haven't had access to them. So helping to return those heritage seeds back to their origin communities and advocating for that is a really important thing allies can help with.
Can I hold it? Oh, Yat Ash A Jamily Dashing and Shia Kinachin Donashle Torching Bashin Nada Touching the. Hi everybody, my name is Jamie. I am Navajo from Navajo Nation up in Keyenta, Arizona. My question is, I can see on the panel your expertise, chef, lawyer, but from my perspective, as a mom, and I have 3 kids at home now, and I think about the questions, and I'm thinking about my community. Where do you see the youth and elderly in these discussions? Because there's always, within Native communities, there's always a time and place for certain things. You don't just pick plants, you don't just pull things, you pray to them, there's always a certain way, there's always ways to do these things, and they're taught a certain way. And then how, with your work, how do you bring that, and how do you teach back to your community, to the youth? Because I don't see any youth here, and I don't see any elderly here. So that's my own concern.
I don't think I look old. I'm kind of fit in that category, though.
No, you're beautiful. Everybody's young here. Everybody's young.
I'm afraid I'm only a peri-elder.
Can I say something right quick about that? When the trustees of the fund got together for the very first time, the very first words out of their mouths were youth. I can tell you straight up that the trustees and all of our staff don't miss one day talking about how the funds work through all the various projects that are out there that could be funded and will be funded. We have to pay attention to that. We got to lift up our youth, and we got to connect them. We got to do whatever we can to support your work as a mom, to connect your youth with your elders. There's so much that can be done. It's so rich, and it varies tribe by tribe. But at the end of the day, I can tell you straight up that the fund's first thoughts were, how do we do this work to make sure that our youth carry on after this fund goes away? So.
And it is an important question about intergenerational work. I do recognize and respect that question. It's an important one.
I was going to say, let me, just real quick, but I should probably let her. But in California, which is where I come from, we have a very robust program where we have elders and youth working together, primarily through our California Indian Basket Weavers Association. As we all know, baskets are associated with food, and they've incorporated a food component into that, where elders are working directly with youth to help them learn the right way to gather, the right way to grow, the right way to be respectful towards not only our food plants, but our basketry plants.
Yeah, our two native farmers, one is 28 and one is 33, and they have been working with the elders of their own tribes and then of the local region to learn about respecting really the sanctity of those seeds and the plants that we work with. And we also honor the first peoples on whose land we are and bring their elders out to really show us and teach us. So I think you hit a really critical point. If we don't have our youth and elders there, like you said, we don't really have much of anything. And a lot of my students too, whether they're native or intertribal or mixed race or white, everyone that I've been meeting lately, young people want to talk about food and want to talk about water and want to get their hands in the dirt. They've read lots of books. They want to get their hands in the dirt. They want to learn how to do these things, but do it in a good way, what Robin Kimmerer calls the honorable harvest, which she basically learned from her elders and our elders, the honorable harvest, which you talked to about those rules of gathering. Thank you for bringing that up.
So does anyone else have any other comments on this? I think we're going to have to wrap this up, but thank you all for a great discussion. Thanks for your questions. Thanks to our panelists for giving a lot of different perspectives and ways of doing things. So,
Thanks to our moderator.
Thank you.
If audience members, those with empty seats next to you, please raise your hands so those in the standing room can fill in. Thank you. And please welcome Albie Miles and Kamuela Enos, moderated by Andy Murphy, journalist and host of the Toasted Sister podcast.
All right, well, this is one of the short panels today, so let's get right into it. Kamuela, can you talk a little bit about Ma'o Organic Farms?
Hi, so hello everyone. My name is Kamuela Enos. I'm Native Hawaiian from the island of Oahu, and I used to represent an organization called Ma'o Organic Farms, which I think is really apropos to what was shared earlier. We're a community-driven organization that was founded by Native Hawaiians in a predominantly Native Hawaiian community that seeks to restore food sovereignty through youth education. So we basically act as a social enterprise that generates revenue. The revenue-generating part of our farm is now the largest organic farm on the island at 250 acres. But the daily operations are run entirely by young adults from our community through a college internship, where they put in 20 hours a week on the farm. In exchange, we give them full tuition waiver to college and $500 a month. So over the last 13 or 14 years, we've graduated over close to 150 students with their associates, 34 with their baccalaureates, and 2 with their masters. And they've moved into running the daily operations. And we've also leveraged this to create a fully fledged degree program with Chancellor Minette Bedham, the Department of Revenue, that's where I got my bachelor's from. But the Sustainable Community Food Systems Baccalaureate at the University of Hawai'i West Oahu. So that's a really quick takeaway.
So you explained just a little bit about the partnership between the University of Hawai'i West and the farm. Can you go a little bit more into what that partnership looks like?
Sure. I think the first thing we were founded on is that the people of Hawaii, our ancestors, have 3,000 years of R&D of how to live on an island. So we stopped saying the word Hawaiian culture because that's word to describe us. And we say ancestral sciences and technologies of integrated biosystems management, right? Have them prove us wrong. And therefore, when we see science, we're talking about the academy. And when we say technology, we're talking about industry. And we are scaling an enterprise that you don't have to be Native Hawaiian to join, but it's rooted in principles. And we're not growing ancestral crops. We're growing crops in an ancestral way. And therefore, we can take it to market, but we know that in organic farming, the first thing we have to do is care for the soil. But the leaders of this program have to go to college. And we needed to create, because we could take brown butts to seats, we knew what pain point of the university, we leveraged that to create a college degree in our terms, in our ways, that prepare them not just to honor their ancestors, but meet a rapidly changing world to be global thought leaders. So we have Albie here, and he's like an ally because he jumps ship like they did in the past to join the Hawaiian people, and they get brought into our family because he gives us real clear indicators of how we can navigate this world. And because of him, we're actually at this conference today.
Albie, did you want to talk about your part?
Sure. My name is Albie Miles, assistant professor at UH West Oahu. And I think the key thing that makes our collaboration successful is that the organization came, meaning Ma Organic Farms, came to the university to co-create an undergraduate degree program focused on sustainable community-based food systems. And I think that the relationship is successful because the orientation of both the university and the community are toward one another. So my program is really dedicated toward raising new generations of food system professionals to think critically and systemically about the food system and actively take a role in food system transformation. And I take that role of mentoring my students very seriously because they are going to be the stewards of the future.
So you guys have been working like this, like a well-oiled machine for a couple of years now. How have you seen the food systems change in the Native Hawaiian community and in the community just surrounding the farm?
Really quickly, I think the way we've set ourselves up, the worse things get, the better we look. Which you kind of have to do. We're lucky that we stand on the shoulders of ancestors that really met the world head on, and we can see their legacy in the landscape. So we have a lot to refer to when we set our own expectations. And I think it's really intrinsic in a lot of youth, because this is a Native Hawaiian community, that connection to landscape is something that matters, and they feel it's lost. So it's like it's well primed. If you just give them the right context, they blow up and you just step out of the way. So we're starting to see indicators like the farm is scaling. We're seeing the sales happen outside of a community. The numbers of young adults who want to go to college in our community is scaling. And we're setting up the context that going to college doesn't alienate you from your ancestry. It provides a space for your ancestry to show that you have the right to be a decision maker, because the monkeys out there aren't doing a good job. The people who are making decisions on your behalf are failing. So you have to step up into it. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing in the rising amounts of students are interested and market share that we're taking as a farm.
And I would say that the success is that, each semester we're graduating maybe 5 up to 7 students. We're starting to develop the intellectual infrastructure for food system transformation in Hawaii, led by Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander and other students. So we're developing, it's a long-term game that we're playing, but we are transferring leadership to the next generation with a systemic understanding of pressing issues in the food and agricultural system and a vision for what the food system needs to be, with Hawaiian culture and self-determination at the center.
I'll say really quickly, it's remiss that we didn't thank our brothers that opened the way and told us what the landscape here looked like first. And that was super important for me because we stand on their shoulders and we're just humbled to be in that space. And also that we don't have ways for you to see the farm. So most of you have your phones open because I can see it from here. So if you just type in AJ Plus, MAO Mao Farms on your YouTube, there's a good video that Al Jazeera did on us. It's 8 minutes long. And we'll point to Kawi Sana, who's my boss. Where's my boss? She started the program. She'll be speaking later to show proof of concept of how our young adults are taking the lead.
So how have universities in the past not been very good partners, if you can sometimes call that a partnership in the past?
I think I'll start is that for a lot of Native people, we've lived through so much trauma that it's been hard for us to be partnered with. And I think we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us that normalized that we don't just have to go in the university, like we belong there. So there have been mistakes made by the university, but I think there are mistakes made by our absence. And now that we're there having dual fluencies, they made us learn their stuff. So we know it really well, but they don't know ours. So when we're in their space teaching back, I think we can rectify, because if you ask what were bad things that happened, it's pretty clear. You can, if you're a native in this audience, you probably have a story about a shitty professor or something that happened that diminished you. So it's really clear. But it's like when we're present in those places, we can help coach and create the better outcomes. That's it. And then we can bring Albies in.
I would say, the history of academic institutions in relationship to indigenous communities has been one of extraction. There's a certain political economy that academics have, and they have to publish and conduct research, and often they have an extractive relationship to indigenous and other communities. And I think that the model that we've created is flipping that. It is reaching into the community for collaboration and seeing the community as a key resource to inform the development of the program and take the youth and bring them from the introductory level to a leadership position as an agent of food system change.
So when a university or maybe another kind of entity is approaching a Native community, I mean, we know that our resources and our knowledge are very, very valuable. What's one thing universities or other, maybe research entities should know about first before they even approach us as Indigenous people to come and build a program or do research?
The first thing I'll say is I'll guarantee you that the community that you're speaking to not only has the answers for what you're looking for, but has the youth that will be able to populate your classrooms. So the work is, well, how do you understand that and help them develop the capacity as a peer? And I really think Albie has really modeled that in a lot of ways with the community, because the way he's engaged authentically with us. And allies share risk, and allies know that they can go home and the community can't, and always front and center with understanding that with us. So maybe you have any thoughts, Albie?
I would just speak to the kind of question of accountability. Is most academics are really accountable to their own institutions or their departments. And I think that we've created a new structure that not only am I accountable to my institution, but I regularly engage my community partners and those who fund the program and seek evaluation, critical feedback on how well is the program that we're running meeting the needs of the community. Because if it's not, then the program is a failure. It may have interesting content, but unless it's meeting the specific needs articulated by the community, then it is unsuccessful.
In the future, what does this partnership look like?
I think more students from our communities taking up leadership roles and making the decisions because of what they've learned from their own community partners like ourselves, but mentors from the outside like Albie, so they can just be just as comfortable getting their younger sibling to break patterns of poverty in Waianae as they are talking in DC. And they have that fluency that they will hold themselves accountable to what they say, but they will be able to practice like reaching out and bridging. Because I think the climate and all of that, that's an externalization of our relationship to each other and our landscape. And if we can't figure that out, we gotta make way for the cockroaches, and I'm not about to do that. So I think that's super critical that we have these spaces for actual practice happen and scale.
And I think we're now at a position to really scale what we've innovated, and I think we're now, by virtue of the expansion of Ma'o Organic Farms, we're in a position now to attract larger students into the program, and not only get them to the completion of their undergraduate degrees, but begin attracting them into master's and PhD programs so that they can begin to occupy those leadership positions.
And one last question here. How do universities and the Native community sort of agree to tackle an issue, to tackle a food issue, or to create a program?
I think we have because of a lot of hard work and intention, a lot of young adults that me and Albie are both accountable to. And the more we give them that question as they're running the operations on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they're at Ma'o, Tuesday, Thursday, in Albie's class, as we really give them, like hand over the mantle of leadership to them and step out of the way, they're the ones that should be deciding. You know, we have to have faith in our coaching that we're going to step back and they're going to tell us what they need to do to pick this up. Because if we're not doing that, we're not actually being sustainable. So I think that's an attitude that needs to be held, like handing it forward and creating young adults that can receive it to pick it up and forecast where we should be going.
And I would say the key success to this is that academics need to reach into indigenous communities and other communities, and the community needs to show up at the doorstep of the institutions asking for the types of program that they think that is really going to serve their community.
If you want to be asked, you have to be excellent first, and you have to lean on your excellence and meet the excellence of the community.
All right, I think that's all our time. We got a couple seconds left, but thank you so much for inviting us here, and thank you, ASU, for providing this awesome space.
We'll be at the after party too if you want to ask questions.
Thank you.
Please welcome Twyla Casador, Terrell Dew Johnson, and Michael Johnson, moderated by Shondine Silversmith, Indigenous Affairs reporter at the Arizona Republic.
Great. Hello, everybody. Yate Shondine Silversmith and Shia Honagani Nishle, King Ani Bushichi and Bilagana Dashache, Torichini Dashanele. My name is Shondine Silversmith. I'm originally from the Navajo Nation, but I currently reside here in Phoenix, and I am the Indigenous Affairs reporter for the Arizona Republic. And I will be leading these three great people through today's panel. So I will take the time to introduce them. So to my left is Twyla Casador. She is a cultural project assistant from the San Carlos Apache Reservation. And then to her left is Terrell Johnson. He is from the Toho'anam Nation, and he is a community activist and artist, as well as the director of the Alexander Memorial Farm, yes. And then I have Michael Kotowa Johnson, and he is a research associate with the Native American Agricultural Fund, but he's also a traditional dry farmer from the Hopi Nation. So we're gonna be leading a conversation through how these three individuals have worked to revitalize traditional foods, as well as harvesting techniques and agricultural techniques within their communities, and how they've done it successfully. So why don't we start off with you, Twyla? Why don't you give us a little bit of background in terms of the type of work that you do for your community?
Dawidan, she Twyla Casador, not association, St. Carlos Apache tribe, Bentley. I work with our community. It's been, it actually started as a grassroots. It's centered with our elders, and it began about 35 years ago. And it was a deep concern with the loss of language, song, ceremony, prayer, and our traditional foodways. It was a big concern with our elders. And our elders had created an elders council. And with that elders council, was able to talk with many elders from the 4 Western Apache tribes and collecting a lot of information pertaining to those topics, and to be able to collect data and to do a lot of intensive one-on-one interviews with elders. So we have a really amazing anthropotanist with our tribe, and he worked a lot with these elders, selecting elders that were in their 70s and 80s at that time. I believe that was 35 years ago. So these elders were raised by their grandparents, not by their parents. So being very selective of the elders that that were to do these interviews with. And these are elders that had hands-on with harvesting, foraging, being part of the community in very many aspects. So from that, bringing it to today was seeing that I understand their concern. You know, today, how many of us do a lot of the things that the people did about 35, 50, 60, 80 years ago? Very few. So being able to bring a lot of that back into our community because of our elders. And, oh, I apologize. I want to say one thing first. Let's take a moment of silence for our elders and ancestors. Okay, thank you. Because of our ancestors and our elders, that's why we're here. That's why we're able to share stories about sustainability and what works in our communities on the reservation. And these are stories that are never told out there in the cities. It's a struggle, it's hard, but seeing the effect of how this information has really impacted the lives of young people today, it's magical. So I'll leave the next one, Terrell.
Well, I started this work about maybe going on 30 years ago. And it just started when I was young. I mean, you know, growing up, I was fortunate enough to grow up with my grandparents. And they were still out there collecting wild foods. They were still out there farming. And so as young kids, we always had to go along and help. You know, when my grandparents would go out and harvest saguaro fruit or cholla buds, it was a family thing. And so we would go and help them, or as kids, we would run around and do our own thing. But I've always enjoyed spending time and picking with my grandmother, because she would be singing songs and telling stories. And growing up, I thought that everybody lived like that. So when I got to the point where I realized that, oh, you know, let's go and do this with other people, the other people didn't know this stuff. And so I was really amazed, because I thought everybody grew up like that. So it took me working with the non-native to get people together to start coming and teaching the community. We worked with elders and we worked with young people. And over the years, over the course of those 30 years, we had developed this program where we were culturally vitalizing the Thon Autumn culture through the foods, through the art, and through the language. A lot of people say, well, you know, it's not just the foods that you're working on. You're working the entire culture of a tribe. I always tell people that, you know, when you're looking at beans, you're looking at the history of the Thon-Autumn people, because it's in their songs, it's in their stories. And it's really important. And so over the course of those 30 years, working with the young people and elders mentoring young people, teaching traditional farming, but also teaching traditional arts, and then working on the language. It was all part of it was 3 simple concepts of working and revitalizing the Thon Autumn culture. And out of that 30 years of working together, we started a farm, an 1,800-acre farm, and we started also working with a smaller farm, a 14-acre farm. And then we also started working in the schools, starting school gardens, getting kids back interested in eating not only traditional foods, but healthy foods like carrots, broccoli. You know, a lot of times, a lot of kids were very surprised that they pulled a carrot out of the ground. They thought it just came from the supermarket wrapped in plastic. So it was really interesting. We also started working and developing programs that will allow us to actually start supplying traditional foods in the school lunches across the nation. It was mentioned earlier that, you know, you had to deal with these people that buy the food for the school, and it was always had to do with money. We couldn't spend this much on this kind of food. So it was really hard, and we did get some food in there, but it was still a struggle. One of the things that we actually also found out is that a lot of the cooks that were in the schools that were cooking for these, for the young people in these tribal schools was that they didn't know any culinary skills. A lot of it was just heat and serve. So we had to go back and actually start teaching people how to actually use knives. So it was all these little barriers that were happening. This is what was going on. We also wanted to start and promote these traditional foods. So we actually started a restaurant called Desert Rain, where a lot of these traditional foods were highlighted in our menu, and all through our menu, all the dishes on the menu, there was a traditional food in it. We also started a magazine, Native Foodways, where we highlighted grassroots people from around the country that were doing this kind of work in their community that hardly ever would probably get the spotlight. So these things were happening, and we were working with young people. In fact, there's a person here in the audience, Sissy Marie Wan, who we worked with when she was 8 years old. She came to our program, working in a community garden, and over the years, she's done an amazing thing with what she was doing in advocating traditional foods, working in the community, representing the Tohono Nation, going to school, going to university. So she's accomplished a lot. And I think with the programs that we've done, we helped a lot of young people become really vibrant, active young people, adults in their community, advocating for revitalizing the tradition. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll go on as we continue.
Hello, my name is Michael. I grew up in different places, but when I was about age 10, my dad was, he dropped me off a lot of times on the Hopi reservation where my grandfather was at. So, because he was in the military, and he thought that would be the best place for me. Now, as a kid, waking up at 5:30, going out and chopping weeds and everything like that, you really don't know, how good that is, but darn, it really shaped me up really good. I went back to school and finished up my PhD just in May in natural resources, so I'm grateful for that. But a lot of that and a lot of my ideas that I have are surrounded by what I've learned as a child and what I've learned as a young man growing up planting the Hopi Way. And the Hopi Way is faith-based. When it's just not corn to us, it's not a commodity like somebody said, it's a way of life. Hopi society is integrated with that. And that's the thing that makes us really resilient. It's our way of life. And so we need to hold on to that. And so what I try to do when I talk about that, when I talk about other Indian tribes and what they're trying to do, I try to bring recognition back to who we were. We have a number of culture conservation techniques out there, whether you want to, when I stack them side by side against what the Natural Resource Conservation Service has, something like contour farming, windbreaks. We've done all that 2,000 years ago, but yet we don't get any credit for that, right? And so I'm just trying to bring back recognition where it belongs. I'm not trying to become equal. I just want to have the recognition. But to me, putting corn in the ground is something very sacred. Because I'm not just putting seeds in the ground, I'm putting life in the ground. And when she comes up and when he comes up, they need to be treated as such. They need to be nurtured just like you and I do, from little kids all the way up. And it's very hard for people to understand the value of that type of intimacy that we have with our crops, because people don't experience that. They go to the store, they pick up an apple, and that's just an apple to them. It's who we are. It's a very beautiful thing. We can plant our corn anywhere from 6 inches to 18 inches deep. Believe that or not, 18 inches, and it still comes up. We don't just put one kernel in the ground, we plant multiple kernels in the ground. There's a number of reasons for that. Science has tried to figure us out a lot of times, but I think it's the other way. For me, science is just complementary. It's not all there is out there. I cannot eat science, but I can eat corn, And, we have over 2,000 years of replication. Science only has less than 200, But I tell you what, we're still here. We're still planting the Hopi Way. Not as many of us are. And what I tried to do is I built a beautiful place out at Hopi, which I wanted to become a focal point. It's all out of sandstone. It's got 16 different rooms. It's got grinding stones, koises, which are roasting pits, pikumi pits. It's got grinding, everything else that I need to grow things or to raise things and to have food. It's going to be a focal point. It's a reminder not only to myself of who I am, but who my people are. It's very important to have that concept. And other than that, I'm trying not to become an academic, but I sort of shouldn't be pulled that way a lot of times, And I still got my planting stick that I have, and I like to tease people about that. And I said, well, that's my science right here, my planting stick, my seeds, and my water. Look it up Hopi sometime. For us to raise stuff in that environment, it's incredible. But there's a lot for us to teach. We just need more people to listen, and we need to be recognized, because I'm really all about recognition.
Great. And going off of that, so Twyla, I found a quote from you that I really thought was amazing. The traditional Apache relationship to food is deeply personal, respectful, and spiritual. And that's a lot for Indigenous people in general. The way we view food, the way we view the land is different from modern society. So why don't you guys elaborate on that a little bit in terms of the relationship that you guys have with food and the way that you're trying to bring back some of your traditional teachings within your community?
And I work with the Western Apache tribes out in with White Mountain, Camp Verde, Payson, and San Carlos. Working with this is just it's a collaboration. It's like you go out in the forest and you see all these different trees and plants. They all help each other. We're the same way. We're all rooted to the land, to the landscape, to the very essence of who we are as Indigenous people. It's from the very land we came from. And respecting that land for young people is bringing them into the community. From some of the work that we do is taking these young people that have never been associated with the clans of who they are, but taking them there from their clan, where their clan, I'm sorry, I'm going stuttering. Okay, so for where their clan is from, but be able to forage the food in that area. Oh, they come back different. They look at that stream, they look at the mountain, they look at the land. They don't look at it the same no more. They look at it like, hey, we grew up there, didn't we? Not at this very time and moment, but at some time in life. And they're very associated. And it transforms a person once they're rooted to their home. And once they realize how important they are to the community in that area. So this project, the work that we do is not just about food. It's about personal self-being and understanding that each of us are important and that how rooted we are to this land is important. Taking care of the land so the land can take care of us. And that's one of the philosophies that Apaches have is this land doesn't belong to us as Indigenous people. We belong to the land. We're caretakers of the land, and we need to respect the land. But bringing that teaching into our young people has been very deep with them. And the only way I can explain it is I'm not even going to ask you to say hi to two people because I know it's going to take a lot of time. But if you were to say hi to two people in this whole audience, you meet two people you have never met. Same with these young people, even some of the older people. They met a plant that they didn't know. They met a mountain they didn't know. They met a stream they didn't know, but they became associated.
And for you, Terrell, one of the quotes that I found from you that I really enjoyed is that we were looking to the past for creating solutions for the future. Mm-hmm. And can you elaborate on the ways that you're doing that now with the work that you do within your community?
Well, again, it was going back to that question that I heard from the first panel and us about working with elders who know this knowledge, looking and listening to them and listen to those stories. And because an elder doesn't necessarily would teach you how to do it. They tell you in stories, and so you listen to these stories. And it's the young people who are going to learn from these stories. So bringing the two together is very important because they are the future. They are the ones who are going to be carrying on these stories, these traditions. And so the work that I've been doing, along with several other people, we're bringing together these two. You know, the community is very important, having that community aspect and that collaboration between the two. I always remember just sitting there, and I remember at the time just being bored and listening to my grandpa and going in and out, driving. But then I remember, I'm trying to recall those stories, because those stories is how I learned how to process and skin a rabbit, you know, or listening to my grandma tell stories and learning how to process the prickly pear or the saguaro fruit. So those things are really important, and just though that quote was actually our motto for doing the things that we do now in the community, and it's really important to bring those two together. You know, we work with an organization, Aho Sustainable Agriculture, that is off the reservation, but it took us working with them to get back onto the reservation and revitalize these concepts, bringing the two together, bringing the elders and bringing the youth together. Working with developing programs like our Young Farmers Program, our apprenticeship program, where we actually have some of our farmers here. I would like to acknowledge them, and then also acknowledge Aho Sustainable Agriculture here that came, who actually are going to be doing the tasting after the program here. So you get to taste a lot of the food that we harvested or grew in our fields.
Michael, you touched on this a little bit when you were talking, but one of the things that I wanted to talk to is that you have been quoted saying it's called culturally based agriculture, because everything we do is not based on economics, it's based on culture and who we are as a people. Can you elaborate on what you mean by culturally based agriculture?
You know, I could call it culturally based agriculture, faith-based agriculture. You know, I think, you know, every time I go give a talk someplace, people always ask me, well, how are you going to make money? You know, and I said, well, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give something back that was kind of taken away, but we're trying to get it back, or not get it back because we have it, but reinforce it. So that's what I mean by that. You know, I mean, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to Hopi, but we don't irrigate out. We don't irrigate out there. We don't use pesticides, herbicides. All of our techniques are designed to control soil moisture. We don't irrigate at all. We only get 6 to 10 inches of annual rainfall a year. Now, as I was at Cornell, the scientists told me that I needed 33 inches of rainfall a year. I don't know where they're getting their corn from, but it wasn't Hopi, right? And so, you know, and so I tell people that, you know, it's everything we do at Hopi is based upon our faith. It has to be that way. When we pray for rain, it's on faith. Somebody asked me one time, they said, Michael, how come you guys don't irrigate? You can irrigate, you'll grow all these beautiful organics, lettuce and cabbage and carrots. And then I looked at them real simple. I looked them in the eye, and you know what I said? What am I going to pray for? You know? It's that simple. It's a simple concept. It's based upon faith for us, and that's what makes our agricultural system very resilient. You know, every time people give me a little tease sometimes, because every time when I go someplace, doesn't matter what a plane, I carry an ear of corn. 4,000 generations of people produce this ear of corn. There's a lot of knowledge in this. A lot of knowledge. But there's also a lot of respect and a lot of reverence that we have at Hopi for this. And this is where it's at. This is my cross. And I'll give you some of these seeds if you ask me. You know why? Because it's the beauty of watching these things grow that makes each individual in this room grow. And that's what I tie this to. So my work at Native American Agricultural Fund is to try to go out and bring back some sort of conservation programs geared to reinforcing culture, because God knows how much we've got taken away, right? We need to reinforce programs that reinforce culture, and that means being able to use our own traditional techniques and our own ways of doing things, because those things are truly sustainable. When we talk about biodiversity, without biodiversity, we're not sustainable. Thank you.
Great, thank you for sharing. Well, I want to know what type of challenges have you guys faced doing this type of work within your communities and from outside communities probably seeking you out for your professional knowledge on your Indigenous ways of life? What are some of the challenges that you have faced?
Well, the challenges that we've been facing over the years that we've run this program was actually really trying to make funders understand that we really were grassroots, that we really had these standards that we had to uphold, and that was working with the elders and not sharing this information, because a lot of times a lot of these grants that either we were trying to apply for wanted us to take all this data, all these information that we had to give back to them, and we were like, well, what are you going to do with them? You know, and we never really got a straight answer, so we've actually had to turn down these kind of grants. Even with our tribal programs, it was really hard to convince our tribe that what we were doing was to benefit the people, was to benefit the nation, because we were preserving the culture. They never actually really had some sort of traditional farm program. It was always cash crop programs, that actually the food never stayed in the community. It was shipped out to different countries. So those were the problems that we had to deal with. And just to let people know that, you know, we are grassroots people. All the people that worked in our programs were from the community, you know, and we were going to stay in the community, you know, and it was really important for them to understand that we were here to help them.
Facing a lot of the barriers were the same as with the grantees, grants, and just grant requirements as far as feedback. And for us, we hold that to us. That's part of our heart you want to take away and put down in a book and catalog and store it somewhere. But a lot of people had, through elders' guidance, was being able to how to respond. You don't even have to respond to a lot of the grant requirements, because what we hold is called, I believe it's cultural, yeah. Yeah, it has some technical word that our grant person does. He's awesome. And he goes, you don't even have to tell them all these detailed information. It was a barrier. We really did lose a lot of fundings when we come across some grants, and the reporting requirements ask you for certain information or even intense information about why you're doing this, what's the purpose of this, what ceremony. You know, they really want to know a lot, but understanding and realizing that, hey, we have control of this grant. That grant should not control us. And we have a voice, and it needs to be heard. And for us to heal our people, only us know how to heal our people. If you don't include Native American input in any of these grants, those grants are failing. And they will fail in these communities. And I've seen a lot of grants fail. But when you incorporate language, song, ceremony, prayer, food, in some way, you're going to really see a positive effect in these indigenous communities, and especially in our reservation. Seeing that difference and seeing those challenges, not just about food, it's about mental health, spiritual health, and we call it a whole state of gojon. It's not just food, but food centers everybody around it, because we all, as a community, participate in ceremonies. We participate in gathering, in prayers, but food's always there. It's a part of our family and always will be.
Yeah, I was, I kind of want to give some credit, to the Hopi Foundation out there, Hopi Permaculture, various other organizations at Hopi, grassroots organizations. I think that's really the best way to go to try to deal with American Indian people. I mean, I'll probably get hit on this one pretty good, but I really don't like tribal governments. They don't seem to be doing as what they're supposed to be doing. To me, they're just another arm of the United States government. And so, but the grassroots people like Honor the Earth, all the other organizations, they're the ones that should work with. Now, you're going to have to work with the tribal government at some point. I know we do, with First Nations Development Institute, but for the most part, the grassroots people where it's at. It's always been like that, right? I also want to say one thing, too, while I'm up here, because I know I feel there's some Hopi women here, and I need to say something because they're really the backbone of our society. They're the ones who own the fields. They're the ones who distribute all the produce, make a lot of decisions. Without them, we wouldn't be here. I'm just like Shrek. I just go move things around, right? But I'm a good-looking Shrek, too, but that's okay. That's another story. But anyways, it's just, that's how I would do that. Work with grassroots, I think that's the best things to get through of anything. But, it's just an honor for me to be sitting here talking to you guys, My planning season starts in May and goes all the way till June 21st, and then I quit, and I do a lot of stuff. But it's just an honor to look at everybody and see all the biodiversity in the room. I'm a big biodiversity person. Thanks a lot.
Oh, can I share one?
Questions? Sure.
Who has a question? Someone from this section.
Questions for our wonderful panelists?
That section's next.
You're going to hold this? Okay. It is said that the Green Revolution, attributed to Norman Borlaug in the 50s and 60s, saved the lives of 2 million people from starvation. So my question is, if we focus on the growth of indigenous farming and producing food in the ancient ways, how are you planning to feed these millions of people? What are there, 7 billion of us on the earth? 1/6 of them are in China. Right now, we have people who go to sleep hungry in this country. And we haven't been able to solve that yet. JFK in some of his speeches would talk about the children going to sleep hungry in this country.
Well, the simple answer to that is the way we're going right now, we're not going to have 1 billion people, And what I'm talking about is 80% of the biodiversity that exists on the globe is on 25% of the land base that's owned by 5% of the population. That 25% of the land base being that it's indigenous. The Green Revolution was good, but the only problem with the Green Revolution is that it always talked about efficiency. And when it did talk about efficiency, it wound out wiping out every single thing that we indigenous people had across the globe. We had all these traditional ways, and here comes a new technology come in there, just got rid of what we did, how we survived for hundreds of years. It may have saved a lot of people, but it also killed a lot of people. We need to go back to where we need to go to, not necessarily the whole world, but we need to focus on those little pockets of biodiversity. Because that's where you're going to come again, because when your ideas don't work, where are you going to go? You're going to come back to where it started. It may be a kind of a sarcastic answer, but like I said, the way we're going, we're not going to have to worry about 7 billion people because there won't be that many people here. And so that's kind of a crazy answer, but that's how I feel, kind of.
Well, I also think, too, that, for myself, knowing these things is that it was taught to me with my grandparents is that, you take care of your family first. So my thing doing this kind of work was we really want to heal the community first. And once we heal our community, we can help other communities. But we still got a long way to heal our community, and we're still doing that kind of work, and that's by revitalizing these foods and the culture. So that's what we're doing right now.
Okay, I need a question from a student. Someone is young. It's a student here. Come on, be brave. Come on. All right, there we go.
Hello, my name is Resley Cortez. I'm an Arawak mestiza from the oldest colony on the planet. You know it as Puerto Rico. I know it as Boriquín. We've recently been devastated by hurricanes and earthquakes, and for almost over 500 years, we haven't had food sovereignty. And so I'm wondering, I'm really wondering if you have any suggestions for how a place which is currently being colonized and billionaires buying up all the land that we've had to flee from, what might we be able to do to reclaim food sovereignty in a place that we don't really have power over?
I always say it always takes one person to start it all. It always takes one seed to plant food that can feed people. So if you find somebody whom you may not know that's in the spotlight, or you would find somebody that's in the woods or in the forest trying to grow food and keep food growing. When you support them, I like what Deborah said, support indigenous sovereignty. And that's true when you find someone who is willing to sacrifice and work hard and keep those cultures alive. I think they need all the support they can get. And from there, it will just ripple out. You will find like-minded people to help in that cause. It's hard, it's easy to say that, but it's really hard work, and you sacrifice a lot. Over the 30 years of me working in this kind of work, I sacrificed a lot. But it was because I know I was doing something good.
A real quick answer to that is that, I know that, even at Hopi, we've had droughts, and even before we got there, we came in as clans, but we claim it as a community. We had little bits of community offer, this and that. And I think it's just that kind of concept. It's the whole community type of concept that everybody has a role to do. But it is very difficult, but it is possible. But a lot of it, you just have to really believe in yourself, and believe in the things that you really believe in, because belief can take you a long way, so.
Oh, no, you want to add something, Twyla? Go ahead.
Okay. It's also sharing that positive words. When we're praying, we're using words, we're using our language, we're asking for prayer. So when we're sharing that positive knowledge about we're gonna have food sovereignty, it's gonna begin with someone in my generation. Those are the words you wanna share, because that's what you're gonna build on. And that's what's going to happen, because you spoke it here today.
Any other questions?
Oh, I know there are a couple more. Who's got a question? Yes, right there.
Thank you for your talk today. I wanted to ask how you're dealing with the idea of commercialization of certain plants and food products by the mainstream Western culture system.
Well, I think, from my standpoint of view, there's 131 different seed saving groups out here. I don't know how many are indigenous ran, how many aren't. One of the suggestions was that they need to help us, that maybe we can get some seed from them. But those seeds that they have right now, they're all place-based. You got to understand, crops are like that. They're place-based. And so whether or not we have them or not, like if I go on a native seed search, and then I get their seeds, and then a lot of times they don't grow good at Hopi because they've lost that vitality over the years, So my solution about commercialization, that's okay. But from what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that we feed ourselves first, and then if we have enough, we can go out and commercialize it. There's a lot of groups that want to help, and they're trying to help, and I really haven't found a solution to that one yet, but I will. As soon as I'm sitting here, I will. And so my thing is just we keep just recognizing these things that we're still here, just that we're still here.
And I'm against it, but also, I mean, I'm not even a supporter of native seed search because of what he just said, and that's just a lot of issues that I've had over the years dealing with them and working on the reservation as a grassroots person. So those kind of things I'm against, and again, I don't support native seed search. I never have. So, these things are just the things that I believe that I need to stand my ground on, because I know that eventually other people will agree with me and stand with me.
I can't really speak on it. I'm a forager, harvester, gatherer, so it's a whole different topic for me. I look at just reintroducing traditional food into our communities and seeing the impact it has on people. So that's a total, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
I guess it could be applied to you in terms of the techniques that you choose to harvest and forage and gather, because the techniques that you use are unique to your community in general. How would you feel if those were commercialized?
Oh, I'm totally against it, no. No.
There you go. We have about 5 minutes left, so we have enough time for a couple more questions.
I think, okay, let me answer that. Let me answer that commercial thing one time, because I don't want to sound like I'm against commercialization. Down here on remote farms, for example, they have like conventional agricultural fields where they grow cotton and hay, but at the same time, they have about 120 acres of of temporary beans, So, we have to learn ways that we can work with each other, collaborations, non-Indians and Indians, because it's getting to the point now where we need each other, and what?
Who was that?
To Ramona Farms.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so they're a good outfit because they raise their traditional crops and they give them to their people, and they also sell them, by the way, but yes, they have to survive in the other ways, so they have to raise commercial crops. So there's the combination of both. It's the best of both worlds, right? And so, commercial for commercialization's sake, I don't believe in that. If it's meant to help somebody, then that's the way it should be.
Next question.
Yep. Good evening, panelists. Thank you for joining us. So relevant to your work, what are you reading and what are you writing?
What are you reading and what are you writing?
Well, I just read Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if you read that. And I've also read my dissertation. That's pretty good. And so that's one of my best works, I think. And you know what? I think my reading in my writing, I think for me is more than is not that. It's just sitting out and watching things, just sitting in the morning and watching things grow and taking some time to breathe, just to figure out who I am sometimes. And so I think that's really what my readings and writing's about. Thanks for asking that question, Matt. Appreciate that.
I'm reading a book that the program that I work with, TOCA, Thunder Author Community Action, wrote about 10 years ago from Ethoy's Garden, and it's a book of recipes and legends and stories. And the reason why I'm reading it again is because some of those stories that the elders talked about with the food, I had forgotten. Only because a couple of weeks ago, I went with my mother to go harvest wild spinach. And she keeps talking about this carrot that grew in her village. And it's this wild carrot. And I remember her telling the story about this carrot in Ethoy's Garden. So I went back and tried to, and reading what she had said, but then I started at the beginning and started reading what the elders were talking about and what they were sharing about their traditional foods and their experiences with traditional foods. So that's what I'm reading right now. And writing, updating my bio.
I don't read. I live with my elders. I go visit them. Every information I get is from my elders. I don't really believe in white literature. I mean, a lot of our history is written by non-natives. So I go back to my elders. Writing, I'm not the best writer. So all my information is just the same way phonetically shared, the way our ancestors and elders have always done.
Well, we have just a little over a minute. Do you have any closing comments that you wanted to bring up to the audience?
Oh, you got a question.
Oh, okay.
Hello, my name is Tyson Paulus. I'm the current art editor for the Reading International Journal. But I came a little bit late, but I wanted to get the end of what you guys were talking about. But my question is that I'm class of 97, Tibet City High School, kind of old here. So, but I got to see what Mount Kopi did as far as what you're talking about with the corn. My question is like, as far as like, why is it like with Arizona and the Navajo Reservation, or just up in Northern, why is it that Bashes, why are they the only grocery place to get your food? Why isn't there any other people who can come in? Because like from growing up, I've never seen pretty much any people like try to go against that. I mean, which ends up the farmer's market, you know, to get natural produce. But I guess that's what my question is like, why is Bashes always there?
Because the simple answer for that is that there's not enough bodies out there. You know, the population's not big enough to support a Whole Foods or Sprouts. You know, and then a lot of times there's the sovereign immunity issues too. You know, the state has a tax, and the tribe has a tax, and the federal government has a tax. You know, a lot of times too, they're not invited in to come. You know. To me, those are food deserts, right? Those are places you just go. I have one little tiny grocery store in Hopi that has nothing but pop and candy and some other stuff that goes out there, you know? But, you know, if my solution to that is that one time we had St. Mary's Food Bank come up there and drop off truckloads of food, but we didn't have the hubs to set it up for a week so that they would wind up taking it back right away, you know? It's all about access. You know, the things that you have here, you have access to. The things we have on the reservation, we just don't have access to it. So we're trying to find ways to create access, you know? And it's very difficult because, you know, a lot of people don't know that we have right to occupancy to our lands, but we don't have right to title. So we don't have credit to go out and buy things to do things to have stores like that come in and support them economically so that they'll want to stay. Because the Walmarts and everybody else, it's all about the big buck, right? We just don't have that. And that's good and that's bad. You know? So the answer to that is we just don't have enough bodies or enough people that have enough money to buy that type of food. Now, if we lower it down some, we can find a program that would lower those costs of those organic products down so that we can afford it, then we should be able to participate. That's why it's like that out there.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists?
And now please welcome Cindy Farley and Charisse Kawe-Sana, moderated by Chelsea Luger, freelance journalist.
All right, they've asked us not to sit because we only have a few short minutes here, so we'll go ahead and get right into it. My first question is for you, Kawi. In our recent email, I saw that you keep a quote below your signature from a book called The One Straw Revolutionary. This quote says, the ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. Please elaborate on what this means to you personally and share an example of the human being cultivation that you've seen in your work.
Yeah, well, aloha, my name is Kawi Sana. I'm currently the farm manager at Malt Organic Farms. And I love that quote because I think about my journey, and I have been with the farm for 12 years. I've graduated from the community, went into the farm, and there's a leadership program, and I had no idea what it was about. And throughout my years there, and as I graduated with my associates and my bachelor's, through the support of the farm, I got to do hands-on work and production with Malt Organic Farms and see the growth from a 5-acre farm to now currently we're just about 281 acres. And it was in that growth of these small increments of the farm expanding that we were able to impact our community and young people to do the same as like my journey, like how I was able to get a college degree. I have a wonderful job with benefits, and I'm continuing to mentor young people. And that quote just really reminds me that I am not teaching them. Like, the land is teaching me, the Aina is teaching me, and the reciprocity of like how the plants grow and how the soil regenerates is really a reflection of how we are connected with ourselves and how connected we are with each other and how connected we are with the land. So this building of a system to like regenerate young people, yeah? My kuleana, my responsibility that I feel now being in this work is not to grow food, yeah? Although it's a key part of like what we do being an organic farm, it's to rebuild our young people to feel confident in themselves, to know who they are, to know their stories, and to represent their ancestors, to represent who they are, yeah, and to continue that story and know that they're still, we're always in the middle, right? One of my mentors also told me that we are only a moment between two eternities, yeah? We had our eternity of our ancestors, and we have the eternity of our future generations. And to think and to be able to think of us to be in that space, it's important for us to develop people and how they continue to connect with the work, with the hana that they do, because it's super critical. And that's when you start to get quality food. So how we've developed our program, although we're beginning to become a little bit larger, middle-sized farm, we were very small for a very long time. And it wasn't about how much money we made at that time. It was about how much students we were able to get through the university system, you know, and about how they're able to understand emotional intelligence and the trauma that our people have been going through for hundreds of years. It's not even hundreds of years. This is just recently. It's like 150 years. Our Native Hawaiian people have been traumatized with the overthrow of our queen in the late 1800s. Our people dying, knowledge dying. And now we have this resurgence of young people, Native Hawaiian, Polynesian, Pakeha, Haole, whoever you want. We are all people. We are all one. So to develop each other is super important to us. And to grow food, I think that comes with the positive relationships that we have with each other. So young people come to the farm 4 o'clock in the morning to harvest vegetables, yeah? And they don't leave till 5 o'clock in the afternoon to show that they're committed to the learning and to not the expansion, but to really help the vision of like what we see our community to be as, right? Always striving for that bigger, deeper community for our people. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that and for the work that you do. I just learned a lot from what you just expressed there. So my next question is for you, Cindy. So Cindy and I have something in common, which is that we were both raised on cattle ranches on Sioux reservations in the Dakotas. Cindy's family is from the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, and mine is from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. So when I heard that about Cindy, that's our way as Lakota people. We always find ways to relate and connect with each other. So I wanted to ask you a question, which is, we know that generations of Lakota families had transferred from bison hunting seamlessly almost into the agricultural or the cattle ranching economy. And I wanted to know, in your work, how are you keeping young people interested, and do you see a future of cattle ranching and other types of agriculture continuing to be a strong and prosperous industry in the Northern Plains?
So my background, I work for the Native American Agriculture Fund. I am a youth and beginning farmer rancher liaison as well as an associate program officer. And my background is with youth programs. I came up through the Intertribal Agriculture Council's youth programming, the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative's youth programming. I've had a lot of friends go through a lot of those too. And my work right now is kind of just keeping contact and supporting my network of young Native farmers and ranchers and food people, as Janie says, and uplifting them and supporting them and connecting them to anybody who, people like Janie and people like Chelsea who can tell our stories and tell it how we know it to be and how it should be told. Cattle ranching in the Dakotas, my family, I come from a long line of cattle ranchers, and some of the statistics that people talk about, how the average age of a rancher and farmer is going down. From the recent ag census, the 2017, that's actually opposite for Indian country. New and beginning farmer and ranchers and young producers are actually going up while everybody else is going down. So that tells us that it's still a viable and very important part of our foodways up in the Northern Plains, but everywhere that they have cattle. The Southwest, we have a lot of connections down here with some of the Pueblos from the Navajo Nation. Obviously, it's structured differently because of the different regional and cultural aspects of everybody's tribe, but I think it's a very important, and it's definitely sustainable. And I think there's a big future in young people coming up. A lot of my family and my friends back home are taking over their parents' or their grandparents' ranches and have been since we were growing up. I grew up having to go out in negative 35-degree weather to kick cows or to put out hay or, to take care of our animals. So I definitely think in the Dakotas and elsewhere, it's still a strong thing, and youth are getting involved. Like you said, building up our next generation to who's gonna be taking care of us and who's gonna be taking care of their children. It's cultural, and that's who we're building up to take care of our land and our animals, so.
Right. Well, that's good to hear that in Indian country it's continuing to be strong among the youth, and that I think that's probably reflective of the intergenerational strength that some people say we've lost parts of our culture, but there's parts that have really remained strong, and I think that those ancestral teachings and that sort of intergenerational passing on of things remains really strong. So we only have 4 minutes left, or 3.5, but really quickly, I would like to ask both of you, what's your future vision? In 30 years, how do you see your program having developed, or the effort that you're working on, how do you see that having developed? And what impact have you all made?
Yeah, 30 years, it's gonna be 2050, guys. That's insane to kind of just think about. Like, I can't believe it's 2020. And the farm has been around for 20 years. So this year actually marks the 20th anniversary of Ma'o, being in the community, growing food, graduating young people. And I think the next vision for the vision for the next 30 years is to create like little Ma'os, but community-based in different communities. To have a program tailored to ranching that provides opportunities of leadership and college and food access, and being innovative of how do you use all these new technology tools to uplift the stories of our people and uplift the stories of our ancestors. My personal goal in the farm is that it took like 20 years to get from 5 to 281. I don't know if I want to expand more because that's still a lot of land, but to continue to grow food in every little pocket that we have. Being from Hawaii, it's very finite amount of land. I'm coming here to like the States and I'm like, gosh, this is so much land. Like, wow. It's like this different for me. So like we've come in, like when I think about it or kind of reflect on it, is like we had a finite amount of land, but it didn't mean that we weren't abundant. Yeah, our practices were abundant. So if we fill spaces with abundant practices, we will restore our food system. We can restore our young people to understand who they come and where they want to go and how they want to create impact and change for our future communities.
All right, thank you for that. And then, Cindy, how about you?
Really quick.
30 years.
Yeah, 30 years, a long time. No, I mean, like I said, the people that I have been blessed to know and connect with over the past few years, because of Native food and agriculture initiatives like IAC and IFAI, I see that today. I mean, you know, it's really amazing that we can project into 30 years, but I see it today everywhere. I see, and it's all interconnected. As Native people, you know, everything's interconnected. Our food systems, our cultural systems, our spiritual, our family kinship systems. And I think it's still the same way. I mean, journalism, STEM, indigenous studies, ag sciences, it's just everywhere, and it's happening now. And I think if it was a little bit more out there and acknowledged, that we would be saying that already. And I think it'll just continue to get stronger with people taking over, you know, the important positions, the leadership positions in ACES, AHEC, the South Dakota State Representative, President of the United States, anything. So I just see it getting better.
All right, Wopila friends, thank you. It's been really great learning from you both. Round of applause.
Please welcome back to the stage Food Tank President Danielle Nierenberg, joined by Kathleen Merrigan, Executive Director of the ASU Swette Center for Sustainable Food Systems.
Wow, what an inspiring afternoon. I'm completely blown away by all of the speakers, all of you in the audience. You know, we heard so much today, and I want to go back to what Chef Sean said earlier. The power lies in food, and also what Janie said about the power really lies in people. And I think if we combine those two things, we have a really amazing way forward. So thank you all for being here. I want to thank Kathleen and Suzanne and all of the ASU staff who put this together. I want to thank my colleagues at Food Tank. It's just been an incredible day, and thanks to all of you.
So we're the shortest panel that you have today. I just want to also thank my colleagues at Food Tank, at the University of Hawai'i. I want to thank Dorinda Wilson and her events team staff, Knowledge Enterprise, Suzanne Palmieri, Charlotte Strong, in particular on my team, but my entire team in putting this together. But more than anything else, I want to thank all of you for your attention today. The test of whether the content is interesting is whether you can hear a pin drop. And during this entire afternoon, for people online, you don't understand, it's a little warm in this room, and it's really crowded. We're really over capacity. You could hear a pin drop. And the power and the passion and the spirituality that came through all of these speakers today. I mean, it was just a really moving program. And we are so proud to be associated with the great leaders that we've heard from today. So I just want to say that. So for those of you who are watching in the live stream, we're sorry you're not coming to this wicked cool reception we're about to have. But I do want to end the program today with asking some of our spiritual leaders to come back on stage to help us with the blessing of the food. Do you want to introduce our people?
So it's my pleasure to introduce Savannah Nelson, Miss Indian ASU, first attendant to give the blessing of the food tonight. And the reception is across the courtyard?
Yes, we'll have people that will help get you there. And I think also our... Well, okay, I don't know how it's going, but
Go
yes.
ahead.
Okay, you start us off.
No,
Thank you.
Please join us. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
Yaat eshik e aro shedena she e topahan shledo ki ani dashiche de kon de na shado hosdo de shekan Shama e Brenda Jensen will ye nut Shiche e Roy Jensen will ye do Shema Sana e Lynn Jensen will ye nut She e ASU de Enish ta Nutrition Dietetics by Enish ta She e na kitamil yeshadoba an na hastet adado na kitamil yeshadoba an na dean Miss Indian ASU first attendant nishle So hello, my name is Savannah Nelson. I am Diné Navajo. I am of the Water's Edge and Towering House clans on my maternal grandfather's side. And I am a fourth-year student here at ASU studying nutrition with a concentration in dietetics in the College of Health Solutions. And I am just proud to be representing here as Miss Indian ASU First Attendant 2019 through 2020. So right now I am going to start the blessing for the reception, and I just ask that you bow your heads and stand if you're able. Dear Creator, I thank you, first of all, for bringing all of us here together tonight and allowing us to share all this knowledge, connect, and bring just awareness to all of our community, especially the indigenous communities that make up Indian country. I just want to ask that you bless each and every one of us in this room. Bless all the elders present, the youth that are here, that have been here today. And I just ask that you also bless the food that we're all about to eat and help it now nourish our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our brains, and everyone in this room. I ask that you watch them as they go on their way home, make it to their families safely, wherever they call home. And I just want you all to, Creator, I just want you to especially be with us indigenous people and ensure that the traditional knowledge that we all have, that is passed on, that our youth is able to grasp that and run with it. And again, I ask that you watch over us as we go home and make it safely wherever that may be. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. I'll see you at the reception.